Let's get to know a little more about Hamish Turner, Director of 9 Now and Programming at 9 Entertainment. Hamish, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Aaron, for having me. Great to finally to chat.
Absolutely. Well, at the moment, there is so many opinions about free-to-air. Some say it's dying, some say it's evolving, some say it's a completely different product to what it used to be. Every network has shows down year on year. Nobody's immune to decline in overnights. What's your take on the free-to-air landscape?
Yeah, I think it's evolving. I think it's very clear that it's evolving, but evolution has kind of been at the center of our jobs, for the past kind of 20 years. I mean, if you think about how things have changed, the rise of the multi-channels, obviously the increase in terms of digital consumption. But ultimately, it's somewhat dictated by the audience. They're the ones who, you talk about holding the keys, they're the ones who hold the keys, and we respond to obviously how they're changing those habits and ensure that we try and keep up with those trends and perhaps even stay ahead of them. So I think it's always an evolution. But what is always core is that content is king. And we need to maintain focus on that and ensure that we're serving up content that engages, surprises, entertains, and continues to delight. So I think, that is the challenge back to us. In a changing landscape where consumption is changing, we need to continue to provide that to the audience.
In interviews I've done with your opposition colleagues, there's been a fascination from the people listening about your personal journeys. I mean, programming director at a free-to-air station is just one of 5 in Australia. It's a rare beast, and one I assume you weren't aspiring to when you were a kid. So let's start with maybe the end of high school. Where was your life heading at that moment?
Yeah, look, I think you go back to programming director. I don't think I would have even known that such a role existed. But if I go back to end of high school, I think probably like a lot of people, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I'd played kind of a lot of sport at school. That was kind of an interest, but I had a knee reconstruction at the end of school and kind of put that on hold. So I think, for me, I went into an arts degree, possibly a bit of a cop-out, but it does give you time to assess exactly where your passions are and what exactly you want to do in life. So went to Monash Uni in Melbourne. I grew up in Melbourne, obviously now based in Sydney, but Melbourne boy through and through. Did a degree. Again, the kind of subjects I did were quite broad. But I think going back to where that root of interest for TV and content came from, I was always fascinated by pop culture. I love music. I kind of collect vinyl in my spare time. I was always a kind of voracious consumer of movies. I remember staying up late when I was at uni and at school watching, I think it was The Sopranos and West Wing, which Nine would always schedule at 10:30 at night. I could never understand why. And I actually remember earliest kind of touch point with TV in terms of analysis. I'd always pick up the Green Guide on a Thursday, which was a lift out and still is a lift out in The Age in Melbourne. And I'd be fascinated by what people were watching, and I'd always kind of read the top 10. And I remember they did both a national and a local view of it. It's fair to say, actually, when we were growing up, we were very much a 7 household. I'd watch Home and Away, The Country Practice, obviously the AFL, or the VFL as it was kind of in the 80s. And I just had an intrigue around why people watched what they did. And I think probably that was the seed of really going into that field. I had a passion for it. And I loved watching content. And I think that was kind of what it stemmed. And I think early on, my dad had always said, you need to find something you're passionate about. And probably knew my personality type. And I think if I look at it, it's really something whereby if I'm not engaged with something, I probably won't give it much time. But those things that I love and enjoy, I'll put 100% into. And I think that's kind of how I kind of started on that journey. So did an arts degree in Monash Uni. Again, got to the end of that, didn't know what I wanted to do, didn't really know it was out there. But I did know someone who worked in television. His name was David Rhodes, and he was head of sport in the Melbourne office. So I went and spoke to him, and he said, "Look, I'm here. Come and have a chat when you're thinking about kind of taking on a full-time job." In the interim, I went overseas, went to the UK, spent 2 years over there, really just enjoying myself, to be honest, and then got to the age of 23 and realised I needed to find a career. So I came back to Australia, went and spoke to Rhodesy. He put me in touch with these. He said the best place to start is in sales because there's plenty of jobs available in sales, and you get a good grounding in terms of what the TV industry is about. So I took a sales assistant role in 2003, and I've been at Nine ever since.
So
that's probably a long-winded tale as to how I got there, but it's been a fun journey, and obviously a ever-evolving journey, and kind of my roles throughout have always changed with the time.
So was that your path to your current role? You were in sales, and then what did you pop into programming or something after that?
Yeah, so great guy called Len Downs worked out of the GD office. He was the head of programming in Melbourne, and really smart guy, kind of a lot of great gut feel and intuition. And I think probably within the first week of going into or starting the job at Nine, realised that content was where I wanted to be. And so, I think probably strategically tried to saddle up as much as I could to him and carved out a bit of a role, which was a conduit between programming and sales. So I would disseminate the information from the programming team back to the sales team. And from there, probably fair to say that's kind of how the content team got to know me. And then an opportunity arose. And I think Jeff Brown was running in Melbourne at the time. And he gave me the opportunity to enter programming. And I actually think it was interesting. It was 2007. I think it was 2007, and I think Michael Healy, who's still director of television at Nine, David Gingell, Downsy, Jeff Brown, I think Ian Law, who was running PBL at the time, were all down in Melbourne. And they said, "Well, look, if you want to enter programming, you got to convince these guys." So I entered a room with them, and I think at the end of it, Ginge said, "Oh well, we might as well give him a crack," and that was it. And so jumped into the programming team as probably a programming assistant, and that was that. So that was 2007, and then in 2009, Jeff Brown said, "Look, mate, if you really want to make it in programming, you need to go to Sydney." And so I packed up, and originally it was 3 months, and we're now, what's that, 13 years later. So that's the abridged version of how I got there. But it's an odd journey. Not many people go from sales into programming, it's fair to say.
I'm just interested to know how much pressure there is in the seat. I mean, I could only imagine that you're the toast of the town when something like MAFS fires, and then you're sort of really challenged when, another show doesn't perform. I mean, how much pressure is there?
Look, and I've said this before, we have a great team at Nine, and, Michael Healy is the director of TV. We've got Adrian Swift as the director of production, but you never lose that feeling at 9 o'clock when a new show is launching, and, you can't sleep the night before, and the heart rate increases, and your destiny is somewhat determined by what the Oztam panel has told us. And it can be boom and bust. And I've been in that room where it's bust, but you've been in that room where it's boom time. And, some of the kind of the shows that I remember seeing really break out. I remember Ninja launching to, I think it was 1.7 million. The Voice launching to 2.2, and was one of those rare beasts that we came in the second day and it had grown on that overnight number. But then there's those shows that just don't work, and, your stomach sinks, but you have to pick yourself up and keep moving. I mean, the environment we work in is so fast-paced, and there's so much stuff coming at you, and you've just got to be nimble and fluid, and you've got to be resilient because everybody's got an opinion, everybody makes a comment, and there's always those 901 heroes who walk in and tell you what you should have done after the fact. But look, you wouldn't swap it in the world because it's it's kind of edge of your seat stuff, and you've got this rare privilege to be able to commission shows, create shows, schedule shows that, you know, millions of people will watch. And I always thought about it in terms of the number of people. If you go to the MCG and you're there on grand final day and you look out and you look at the 100,000 people who are sitting in that stadium, and then you think about, you know, look at The Voice when it launched, it did 2.2, times that by 20, the strength and the ability to hit that audience and, you know, emotionally move them is not lost on us. And I think that's, as I said, it's a gift, and we don't take it for granted.
So what does an actual day look like for you, Hamish? Do you come in, check the ratings? What happens on a normal day?
Well, I guess this question probably goes back to really me and what's my personal life look like. So I'm married. I've got 4 kids. They range from 8-year-old, who's the eldest, down to a 21-month-old. So wow. Life at home is probably similar to the life at work in that it is a pretty hectic environment. So I'm up early. It's either I'm always up by probably 5:30 in the morning. Invariably, it's woken by one of the kids. But I'm up early. I kind of get out the door early. So probably out the door by 6:15, and then in the office by 7:15. Try and grab a coffee on the way to work. If there's no parks at my local coffee shop, I'll keep driving until I find one. And then you're in, and I think probably the first hour of the day is either catching up on what's happened overnight. So we obviously get reports around what's happened in the US, what's happened in the UK. You'll get sent shows that you'll try and kind of grab some time to have a look at. You're trying to get back to emails that you haven't got back to, or at least read them. And then, you know, a lot of people kind of start coming in around 8:30. So that's when it starts. It's kind of like a washing machine, really. You kind of jump in the washing machine. Sometimes you don't really know which way it's going to spin or turn or throw you into. And you get to the end of the day and it's kind of like, oh, geez, I've got to do that all again. But like the day is you're catching up with your teams. Obviously, I'm looking after 9 now as well. So that has meant that you're dealing with a whole new set of people that sit in the digital space, and that's been really rewarding. I mean, the last year, the kind of learning curve has been great, to be honest. And you know, we are moving into a streaming first future, and it's been a great journey in terms of understanding the complexities of what a digital world looks like. You know, we've gone from being in a very much closed environment where you're protected by a spectrum, but you've also only got a finite amount of space that you can work with. Whereas in the digital world, you know, it's the wild, wild west. You don't have protections that you necessarily have in a broadcast world, but with that comes opportunity. And so I think part of that has been, well, what does television and free-to-air television look like moving forward? What does that look like in a digital and streaming first world? And you know, how do we harness the power of what we've always been good at and take it into the next phase to ensure both survival and you know, and a thriving platform. So part of the day is dealing with those guys. It's getting as much information as possible. It's obviously looking at 9 o'clock, and I think there's key points in the day. At 9 o'clock, the numbers come in. You digest those. You try and you know, carve it, understand it, look at where some of the challenges are. And a lot of the day is, I think it's broken into the 3 parts. One is looking in the current, so looking back, looking in the current, but really looking into the future, understanding, you know, what we need to be doing in 6, 12, 18 months' time. And I think that is kind of the crux of the day. I try and get out by 5:30 because, you know, hour home, 6:30, kids, dinner, and then I'm down in front of the TV again at 7:30. You know, I think some listeners probably think, you know, there's plenty of perks and fun times in the job, but, you know, I spend my nights watching TV because that's the job. And that doesn't change. And you've got to be a consumer of free-to-air. You've got to enjoy free-to-air and understand how the audience is consuming free-to-air. You know, and now there's complexities in terms of different distribution of to the platform. So now you're consuming via 9 Now, understanding the challenges there. What does that experience look like? But there's never a dull moment. It's fair to say, Aaron.
So when you're on the couch at home, what are you actually watching? What do you enjoy watching?
So I will watch all free-to-air competitors. I'll probably now spend majority of my time watching primary channels. And look, if I get spare time, I'm then flicking through the SVODs. Last night I watched, I think it was the third episode of Stranger Things, season 4. But again, we're like voracious consumers. Like, you need to understand the entire spectrum of what is available to the audience. So always consuming, always trying to understand, always learn, what is popping and why it's popping. I'm intrigued by Stranger Things, actually, because, and I don't know if you watch it, Aaron, but there has been a very interesting creative turn in terms of this season. Almost is going into the horror space, and the interesting thing there is that horror is quite niche and nuanced, and I think it's been a really interesting creative move from that team. There's obviously been a big hiatus in terms of the show, and so the kids are now adults. I mean, I looked it up the other day. Steve, I don't know what his the actor's name is, but he's 30 in real life.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like, I don't know if you remember 90210. And,
I do.
There was like there was a 32-year-old playing an 18-year-old. It kind of feels like that again. But yeah, no, some really interesting creative choices, which I think, I don't know. I'd be intrigued to know what the completion rate on it is. I mean, it is a unique beast, that show, but I find it intriguing what they've done with this season.
Do you ever find that your own tastes of what you like seems to seep into the Nine programming? I haven't seen The West Wing or Sopranos on Nine now yet, but are there any of your own tastes that seep through?
Yeah, I think that's locked into the Warner Brothers deal that Foxtel have, so they'll have all those shows. Absolutely. I think when I was at uni doing that art degree, I did lean into probably more cultish type viewing, and even when I was in the UK, I'd go and go to indie cinemas, and I remember going to the London Film Festival and seeing the launch of the premiere of Donnie Darko. So I think you indulge yourself when you're at a certain age, but I think with the job, you really view you try and consume as a viewer, and you talked about it before. The job is a lot of gut and it's a lot of experience, and I think you build that over time. And so I'm very much a free-to-air commercial viewer and enjoy free-to-air commercial shows. I guess the challenge with some of our shows is that you've already seen them by the time they go to air. So I think there is a really unique part of the job where your ability just to sit back and view as an audience. I find sometimes when you're talking to either colleagues or competitors or whatever, sometimes people try and overanalyze the viewing experience, but sometimes the best thing is to turn your brain off and just kind of feel trust your feel, trust your gut. Because often people aren't there analyzing every frame. They're not there picking up every nuance of a show. It's actually how it flows over them. And so, yeah, sometimes the best part of it is just not having seen a show before and just sitting there as a viewer, watching as a viewer would on their couch, with all the distractions that come with a bustling home life. Well, but some of the greatest opportunity for me, and I think what's really enriched me since having kids, is that family viewing experience. Being able to sit there and, if I put my 9 hat on, or even now with 7, but watching The Voice with the kids and watching Ninja Warrior with the kids and just seeing how they respond to that. And Lego Masters is one of their favorite shows. And it's, again, not lost to me that you see them watch Lego Masters, they run into the toy room, they grab all their Lego, they pull it out, and they start kind of building. And it's been probably an evolution in terms of how I engage with the TV now at home. and that viewing experience. And it changes. This is the thing. It's like, it's easy as an 18, 19-year-old to sit there and consume YouTube or watch Netflix and whatever. But that shared viewing experience, especially when, you're in a family unit, it changes it. It changes things. And so, I watch Bluey. Like, I reckon my knowledge of the first 2 seasons of Bluey is pretty good. But it's such a great show because it delivers to both the adults and the kids. And they're watching it on a different level, and you're picking up on, on all those things that you see a reflection of yourself in your own life.
That theme about going, with your gut, can you tell me about a format you took a chance on? Like perhaps it was untested, not a lot of support maybe, but you trusted your gut and it was a success? Because the one that comes to mind for me, I remember David Mott was telling me about MasterChef. I think that one went down like a lead balloon, doing a cooking show, that sort of thing, and look what happened.
Yeah, I think the challenge a lot of the time is that when a theme is presented, it's easier to dismiss it based on what history has told you. But what wasn't pitched as part of that show was the heart, the warmth, the empathy, the human stories, which only come about through the crafting of amazing production unit. And so I remember back in the day what you read on look, I watched MasterChef. I'd been watching MasterChef the UK version on Foxtel, I believe. Was where it originally ran. But that show is fundamentally different to the show that ESA built and produced for 10. And I think Paul Franklin was probably one of the creative or key creatives behind that show. My point is that it's very different in terms of being pitched an idea to actually seeing it come to fruition. And there's so many things that can go wrong in that process. But if we go back to the question, I think as a team, one of the ones that we're most proud of are those that, something like a Lego Masters, where the original was so different to what was eventually delivered. But the process we went through in order to get to that show, the inclusion of Hamish Blake, which was Michael Healy's idea, and the work, and some of the best things is working with some amazing creative teams like Animal Shine and bringing it to life, and then seeing that show being picked up in the US, or something like a parental guidance, which had been developed here for a very long time. I think it had been in development for 3 years. And then we pitched it out to a couple of different production companies and eventually gave it to Eureka, and seeing an original idea come to life. Because it's unique in Australia, especially a strip, being able to kind of, the beginning of the seed of an idea and then seeing it going all the way into actually coming to life as a show with the talent attached. I mean, this is the thing. It's like so many things can go wrong in that process from inception. But I think the challenge, the thing you've always got to do is maintain oxygen into ideas. Never dismiss an idea before you have to, and maybe that eventually comes, but it's always being open to new ideas and allowing them to kind of go on their journey to see if you can find something there. Because some of the best ideas and the ones that we haven't come across yet will be things that people have dismissed in the past. And just because it hasn't worked in the past doesn't mean it won't work in the future. So, going back to the question, I think shows like Lego Masters, shows like Parental Guidance, but then seeing shows like Ninja Warrior and The Voice like completely explode out of the blocks. Or seeing something like A Married at First Sight, again, started as a 6-part obdoc series, is turned into a mega reality romp effectively, and seeing it kind of claw back and find an audience against MKR and then eventually kind of turn into the beast it is today.
Like with success, obviously comes failure at times. Is there a format that you just personally hoped would have done better, but it didn't, or maybe a show that you sort of had on your hands, but you let it pass and then it became a hit with another network?
I actually can't think of any, because I think what eventually you do, Aaron, is you wipe them from your conscience. I think there's probably been shows where, and just due to the nature of the beast, I think we have been at fault in past where you haven't had patience with a show because of whatever pressures you had at that point in time to deliver. And we know that shows like Have You Been Paying Attention? They didn't find its audience until the third, fourth season, and so it is a great example of what can happen when a show finds its audience. And I think Working Dog were a big part of that as well as obviously Bev and the team at 10. But in terms of shows, I think for us, there wasn't any show. There's been shows that you've been nervous about the performance of, but I wouldn't say there's any show that possibly, because I think by the time you see it, you kind of have a fairly good understanding of where it's going to fall. And what I mean by that is that obviously the point of commission, sometimes there's nothing to see. And by the time you've actually seen the show, you're like, okay, there was probably some dodgy creative choices there, or okay, we've scheduled in a slot where there's a king hitter there, and it's just not gonna have a chance. I think there were some panel shows back in the day that we probably should have persisted with. I remember there was the sports panel show that Eddie Maguire hosted that it actually had some signs of life, and we kind of cut it pretty early. But I can't think of any of the big shows that we've had a crack with that possibly we should have continued with. And look, again, like most recent history, we've had a pretty good hit rate in terms of those strips, which obviously gives you security in terms of because I remember back in the day where I think we had Celebrity Overhaul or Excess Baggage, as it was called.
Yeah.
And it launched our year and it didn't work, and we pulled it. I would never want to go back to a world where you have to pull, an 8-week strip because you're faced with such a dire prospects in terms of how you navigate that. I think the day of doing that is kind of over.
Let's talk about ratings. We often do that at TV Black Box, and plenty of arguments on that.
I know it's always great conjecture in terms of those conversations. It also creates the people who like indulging in that versus those who don't. I notice there's often the people who just step back and go, you know what, I'm not dealing with this again.
Yeah. Well, let's Maths for 9. I guess to a lesser extent, The Voice for 7 would arguably be the last of the powerhouse ratings where the figures coming through are way above most other shows. We're seeing 400, 500K averages for a number of shows in overnights, and then depending on the show, anywhere between a 25%, 50% uplift in total TV. Every network finds some success in all of their shows, with their media reports in the morning. But how is it now that we can judge a show's performance on whether it's underperforming, it's doing average, or it's doing really well?
Well, I think it comes down to the nuance of the numbers. I mean, obviously, we, for the last 10 years, have gone out and said that we're a 25-4 network. And so I think we need to be judged on what our 25-4 performance for that show is. Now, there is obviously a significant shift in terms of what the overnights tell us, and we're seeing this worldwide, versus what the total TV footprint looks like. And look, that changes over time. But I think where, as an industry, we've fallen behind is staying up to date with audience trends. And so even if you look at those OzTAM overnight numbers, it actually doesn't take into consideration the audience who have watched it digitally overnight. And so I note James Warburton has said that we should get rid of overnights. I think that was the headline. I would argue that we need to adapt and evolve that metric and ensure that we are delivering an overnight number that is that is reflective of actually how people are consuming those shows. And so I think back to your question, we need to be judged on our 25-4 audience delivery. And we need to be judged on both what that show delivers us overnight, because unduplicated reach is still a really important metric. It's where we are unique in the ecosystem. The ability to deliver 3, 4, 5, 6, 700,000 people in one hit is why it's such a valuable thing to audience and advertisers. But we also need to reflect how consumption has changed, and that, something like A Married at First Sight delivers both on linear broadcast, live streaming, as well as VOD.
Well, just to further understand that holistic picture of ratings from your perspective, let me give you 3 shows, and you can let me know how you think they're performing or underperforming or doing really well. Let's start with Celebrity Apprentice, because that's obviously on Channel 9.
Yep. Yeah, so I think the performance of Celebrity Apprentice is probably a bit below where we'd want it to be. I think the ambition for us was overnights of 450 to 500, and it's just sitting below that. I think the pleasing thing with Celebrity Apprentice is that it hasn't dropped. Where it launched is where it's settled. So it's found its audience. It has a core, robust, dedicated audience. It is obviously delivering cross-platform as well, but I would say for us, we were hoping it was going to do a little bit more.
So what about Big Brother on 7? Because we obviously know what the overnights are for that, but then obviously it's seeing a big uplift in total TV.
Yeah, I'd say there'd be, and again, it's not my place to provide judgment on their shows. I'd say they'd be disappointed a little bit with the broadcast ratings, but pleased with the digital ratings, because it is a strong performer for 7+.
And what about finally MasterChef? Because that's the 3rd one in that slot.
Yeah, I think its performance has stabilised, and Tim would be very happy with how it is performing at this point in time.
There's always the common debate, and you've heard it a million times: total people versus demos. I know you're just saying about 25 to 54s for 9. It seems to me that it's important when the network is winning it. I mean, it's certainly, if you look back at 9's campaign, still the one. They had all the promos running when they were number 1, but now not being number 1, they're not so important. I mean, to the general public, I guess it gauges the popularity of shows to see how many Australians are watching the show, but from a network perspective, it may not assist, obviously, with advertisers. So is there a place for total people numbers?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think in terms of, I think there needs to be a clear delineation between what the commercial conversation is. And I think sometimes commercial and audience focused, so when I'm talking audience focused, like press, is related. I think total people, understanding demos, and I talked about it in the Green Guide in 1992. It provided, even then, I think it provided both local and national figures there. And I think with even demos, I mean, the US have been doing demos for 20 years, and that's because of the commercial realities around it. But I think equally important is that viewers like to understand what people are watching. And so I think there's a place for both. And for us, I think we've been fairly consistent, at least for the last 10 years, driven by commercial outcomes. The 25-4s is our focus. And as part of any network strategy, you need to have a clear focus and strategy in terms of how you commission. I think the worst scenario would be us not having an understanding of who we are and what we're trying to deliver upon, and not having a clear demographic focus, which informs us across all platforms, and obviously drives back to obviously how we commercialize that audience as well. And look, I do feel for you guys in terms of trying to understand exactly, the vernacular around who we're trying to deliver to, on what platform, because it's not easy. I mean, even internally, people are confused by it. So I think as an industry, we need to continue to do better in terms of delivering that outcome and those metrics and how we actually measure success. But I think every network is going to have a different narrative based on what their strategy is.
Well, that total people debate has been sidelined recently for the national versus five capital city debate. Of course, me being on the national side and Rob McKnight being on the five city caps side. Some are cynical because they believe that because the numbers are down, it seems more impressive to say 600,000 watch Celebrity Apprentice rather than 400,000. I've never understood the five cap city ratings, to be honest. I mean, if a supermarket giant wants to advertise nationally, then I would imagine they would want to include all Australians. We've always had, local advertising, and that's never going to change because there's Sydney local ads, and then there's Perth local ads, and there's Melbourne local ads. Can you please make the debate, I guess, a bit more clearer from a network perspective about national versus five cap cities?
Well, I think it came back to ownership at the end of the day. It's like we didn't own our regionals. We didn't actually even own Adelaide and Perth stations at one point in time. So I think that really came back to the ownership debate because we were selling five cap cities and we measured ourselves on that. So, ultimately, I think it goes back to that. We probably didn't have a control of our own destiny at that point in time. So you measured yourself against the thing that you get probably rewarded upon. I think that's what ultimately that's what it goes back to. Cynically, are we only reporting on or delivering that kind of national view? I think it's different depending on who you talk to. Obviously, Seven have bought Prime or in the process of doing that. And so they've got a vested interest in terms of delivering or talking about a national footprint. For us, there's still a little bit different. It's a little bit different in terms of that ownership structure. Again, I think there's the commercial reality versus how you view it as a punter. And I don't think I've really answered your question, but I think the challenge is it's a historical challenge based on ownership.
So where do you think we're at now? Do you think moving this year, next year, we're going to move into a national ratings only, or is there still a place for five cap cities?
I can only talk from my experience, and I would say that we are more focused than ever on all our audience, wherever they may be.
Okay. The networks together brief OzTam as to what parameters they want reported. So how can we still have this redundant survey year? Is it time to ditch it?
Oh, look, mate, it really just gives us a couple of weeks off. That's possibly what it comes down to. I don't think we think about things in terms of a survey year anymore, and you could see that, in terms of how we schedule. We're obviously conscious that it is different in the summertime, and especially around Christmas, where you've got less eyeballs on your content. I think that is something that, in terms of the competition, they don't turn off. And when I'm talking competition, I'm talking every other person who's competing for eyeballs and time at this point in time. They're always serving up content. So I think for us, we need to do that as well. And so I think, I don't disagree. It's somewhat redundant, a survey year.
You actually touched on this a little bit, but I get emails all the time from networks about ratings saying you need to understand this perspective or this perspective in your reporting. My question is, how is the media supposed to sift through information from networks when all they say is that they won, but using different metrics? As an example, Seven wins the network night nationally, Nine wins the network night five capital cities, Nine is winning calendar year, Seven's winning survey, Seven won the night in 25 to 54, but Nine specifically won 25 to 54 with their main tentpole program. Nine is winning, this on average ratings, Seven is winning on weeks 1. Seven wins 16 to 39 and 25 to 54 in capital cities on primary, but Seven wins them both nationally on network. So should there not be a balance, a baseline in reporting and then have an analysis afterwards?
I think there is a baseline, and that is the predetermined demos. So I remember you chatting about this in terms of GBs with kids, but there is, total people, 25-4s, 1639s, less so 1849s because it's a combination of the two. That's more of a US metric, and GBs with kids. When we start going out of those demographics, I think you're pushing the barrel a little bit. There are predetermined demos. I think you guys are a free media organisation, and you have the ability to report on whatever you want. I think it is up to you guys to determine exactly what your audience wants to hear, and if that's total people, so be it. But it's just understanding with context that, you know, we target 25-4s, and that was our performance on 25-4s. But ultimately, I think less is best as well, to be fair, Aaron. I think if you start digging down, that's where confusion comes. But again, it comes down to the nuance of reporting and ensuring that we're delivering very clear and concise numbers. And what I mean by that is it's going back to this overnight situation whereby we're actually not reporting on the full number, because actually it's not set up to do that at this point in time. Now, obviously, the industry is pushing to ensure that we get to a point where we are reporting that full number, and hopefully we provide greater clarity moving forward. But I think the numbers are there. I hope that the numbers are there in terms of what those total people shares are, what the 25-4 shares are, and then it's up to you guys to determine as journos and reporters what is fair and equitable.
I want to expand on something that you said earlier about maths. It's still a powerhouse and it's crushing everything in its path. But usually when a show is performing well in overnights, the competition does better in catch-up, because obviously the audience is watching that show live and then they have to catch up on the other shows later. However, despite Nine having phenomenal numbers in overnights and maths, it had huge uplifts in total TV. That actually blew my mind. Were you even surprised that it did super well in both metrics?
Well, look, yes and no, in that it has been doing that for, you know, the last kind of 5 years. And look, I think it does come down to the demographic composition. So this is where I kind of think it is important, in that it's the type of show, it sits in the reality romance space. There is a kind of core 16 to 39 female skewing audience that are more inclined to be watching via VOD, but it is such a beast and creates headlines and stories that you get kind of that total TV or total audience as well. And I think it's one of those rare, well, it is absolutely, it sits above and beyond anything else in terms of how it delivers across different demos on different platforms. And it's kind of like self-serving in many ways, in that the storylines and the noise around it kind of drives a lot of this, and it's kind of alchemy in a way. Again, I can't point to anything else on air at this point in time, or even in the last 10 years, that is delivered in a way it has. And it's not something you can look at and go, oh, how do you recreate that? I think it's part of it is where it's been, the journey it's gone through. But also, you know, like we always look at it as like it's a big soap opera. You bring in a new cast of characters, and obviously the format that was created with ESA has a proven track record of continuing to deliver on those storylines. I think one of the challenges you would say is, well, how do you up on the last season, or how do you create noise like the last season? But it's actually finding the different stories and the different characters that are reflective of the times to do that. And so I think probably the thing for us is its ability to sustain and continue to drive hard when it burns so brightly. But yeah, it's just to show that because of the people who consume it, the audience composition, it's one that delivers both with a broad audience, because people don't want to miss out on it, but also with a kind of streaming first audience as well. And it's why you see such a huge footprint in terms of both live streaming audience as well as a VOD or a video on demand audience.
Well, let's move on to Ninja Warrior. That's obviously coming back without Beck and Ben. Did you ever consider folding the show, or was this an opportunity for a big refresh?
Yeah, I think through change comes opportunity. So, you know, I feel like we've really re-energized the show just in terms of the format beats. You know, the latest promo is out at the moment. It's the kind of young guns, so the teens are on the rise, and they're taking on the establishment. And there's a new kind of race component where they race side by side. And it just feels like a kind of a completely new and refreshed show. And I think the energy that Layla and Jim bring to it only builds on that. So no, we never thought of folding the show. We thought about how do you evolve the show, in what is, its 5th, 6th season.
Com Games are coming up for 7 soon. So what are the plans for 9? Obviously, 9 can do one of 3 things. They can use it essentially as a repeat fortnight and rest your tent poles. You can run a normal schedule, or you can run really aggressively and counter program. What strategy will we be using this year with the Commonwealth Games?
Well, I think the clue to that, Aaron, lies in what we did against the Olympics, and also in how I answered the question before, in that we don't look at it just in terms of survey year. We need to be always providing for our audience, ensuring that they continue to be stimulated, that we continue momentum, and that we continue to give them a reason to switch on. So we definitely won't be going in with a repeat schedule. It'll be business as usual.
Fair enough. Look, you're the man in charge of programming. A very quick update on a couple of shows. I always get a few Kiwis asking me when West Side's coming back, because there's one final season to go. Is that going to come up on Gem or something soon?
Yes, yep, absolutely. I can't give you specific dates, but it will be back. Yep.
And what about Country Home Rescue? That was sort of promised for the end of last year, but hasn't surfaced yet. I think that's with Shayna Blaze. Is that coming?
Yeah, that's right. It was a few production challenges there, but primarily related to COVID. But because we missed the block cycle last year, it'll be coming in this year, kind of back end of the year.
And what do you think about the future for the weakest link? There was average ratings sometimes, but the specials worked quite well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, Aaron. Obviously when we programmed off the back of the related theme through the celebrities, so whether it be the blockheads or the travel guides, it did find an audience. So I think we obviously looked at where those numbers kind of really popped. And I think we're still kind of assessing, what we do with that format moving forward.
Nine has been doing a lot of investment in the post-tentpole shows, around 8:30, like the 100, Under Investigation, Australia Behind Bars, Emergency Paramedics to success, really. Is this something you'll keep focusing on?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this really talks to that kind of relevancy question. We know that in a kind of SVOD world where 70% of the population, or probably more now, has that post the strip, they were kind of looking at alternatives, and so the challenge was for us to again drive to a greater relevancy through that period, ensure that we were providing new, fresh content that gave people a reason to stay on the platform. We don't want to just kind of put our hands in the air and say, "Oh yeah, off you go, you're done with us for the night." So we're absolutely always thinking about ways in which we can continue, driving audience vertically on the platform. And what I mean by that is keeping them on the platform for longer. One of the big changes of late has been, that real increase in terms of live streaming. So people who've got connected TVs watching the live 9 stream. And what we're seeing is, the patterns of old, where that vertical flow is continuing to be really important, and how do we keep people on the platform for longer? And I think our best defense is good content and strong content. And so investment in shows like Under Investigation with Liz Hayes, obviously the 100, which has been really successful for us with Andy Lee, to things like Emergency Paramedics, etc., just talks to that value proposition to keep people on the platform for longer.
I'm pretty sure you're the last network making television for Saturday nights with, ACA's there and Space Invaders has been there. Do you still see some potential in the Saturday nights outside of sport?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, it becomes a bit of a wasteland when you just go into a bit of a repeat movie cycle. And again, you need to provide a reason for people to stay on the platform. And I think something like Space Invaders, Friday nights is challenging because you do have sport across, especially through the winter months. Whereas Saturday we don't. Obviously, Seven have the AFL. And so we saw that as an opportunity to perhaps provide some fresh content there. And obviously working with WTFN, we came up with Space Invaders. It was originally called Inside Out. That was its working title. But no, we're really happy with that show. Happy with the performance, and again, this talks to providing a reason for people to tune into Nine on the Saturday night or stay with Nine post the news and ACA.
All right, a couple of other subjects, I guess. I know the NBCU deal is up in the air. I believe offers have been made. No announcement yet about that. If you did lose the NBC deal, my feeling is that it wouldn't make a big dent in broadcast because Nine really doesn't rely on US comedies and dramas. They're usually late night, but it might have more of an impact on Nine Now and Stan. How important is the NBC deal for Nine?
Look, I think we've got Stan have a deal with NBC, and we still have a deal with NBC until the end of this year. I think there is value in maintaining that deal, but I think there are still. I think what happened was people got caught in a cycle where they said everyone's going direct consumer. There's only going to be one distributor in the market. And that hasn't played out. And we've seen it in terms of what's happening in the streaming space. Like Netflix came in as the big disruptor, but the market value that was put on that business was based on this unsustainable growth. And I think what happened was they took the growth through COVID as just kind of, it was business as usual. And obviously, they've run into some challenges post that period where people have gone back to normal living and that growth wasn't sustainable. And the kind of futures business model kind of fell apart. And we've seen that kind of reflected in their share price. And what I mean by that is that, streaming was the toast of the town, especially those big US direct-to-consumers. And they probably all thought that it was going to grow their market value and that this was a sustainable business model. And I question whether that is the case, and I think that perhaps some will come back into the open market and have come back into the open market because the distribution dollars are huge.
Yeah.
So I think with everything, as things evolve, as things change, those businesses adapt, and so I think, it's not the doom and gloom of scarcity that perhaps everyone thought was going to be the case a couple of years ago.
On a similar theme, let's go to the multi-channels. And I know Nine Rush and Nine Life are reliant on programming from Discovery. But with HBO Max and Discovery set to launch in Australia in 2023, probably, when current deals expire, will that sort of spell the end of these channels?
No, I think Discovery is very much very focused on looking at free to air as a driver for brand and marketing and awareness. And so we've got a very strong relationship with them in terms of both Nine Life and Discovery deals. Those are long-term deals, so they're not going away anytime soon. And I think they can coexist, and I know they can coexist, and that is very much the conversations that we're having with them. So, I have no doubt that those relationships will continue.
I was interested to know, though, has any of those deals changed? Because predominantly in the last 6 months, I've noticed that those channels used to have wall-to-wall new programming, 7:30 to 11:30, with all that huge content that you have. But there's a lot of repeats that have been thrown in lately. Has something changed with that, or is it just the cycle of shows?
No, it's just the cycle. It will start amping up the kind of the fresher content. Sometimes it relates to the deal that you've had previously and the rollover into the next one. We have gone through a couple of years of COVID, which have affected production cycles across the world. And you're probably seeing a little bit of a lag effect of that. But no, it's not related to a change in deal or deal terms.
Nine Rush and Nine Life and Nine Gym I think, are very identifiable channels in knowing what you're going to get. Nine Go used to be the most popular Nine multi-channel and very, young branding. It seems, in my opinion, to have gone the way of Seven Flicks, with people not quite understanding what it is, and ratings kind of reflect that now. What is Nine Go now, and what are the plans for the channel?
It's a really good question. I think it probably again came about as where the inception of that channel came from. And back in 2009, we had a Warner Brothers output deal where there was a lot of content that we didn't have a platform to place that content. And so I think instead of building a channel based on a brand identity, we built it based on an output deal. And so I think because of that, you lose a sense of identity, especially when you lose the content that came with that output deal. Right. Whereas things like Life and Rush, very clearly defined audience, clearly defined genre, clearly defined brand. Gem as well, it kind of knew its audience. And so, yeah, I totally agree. It has lost its identity, but it's also been hit by, I think, Go had a high proportion of viewers who I kind of describe as default viewers, whereby they've kind of surfed around, they've had a look, and they then flick on a movie. I think what's happened is because the SVODs have come into play, that level of default viewing has dropped and diminished quite a bit. And so it's kind of suffering on two fronts. And so I think we probably need to relook at exactly what it stands for, who its audience is, and the kind of content pipeline that can be delivered that's sustainable above and beyond that of, those output deals.
On a completely different tangent, you're recently at the LA screenings. Can you tell me about that and about the trip and any possible announcements?
Yeah, look, it was great to travel again. We hadn't been to LA for 3 years, obviously because of COVID. And it was my first international trip since kind of the COVID pandemic. I think in terms of top line, look, it has changed. We know that those big production companies, well, some like Disney aren't screening anymore because they've gone fully into direct to consumer. And the content on offer had changed quite a bit. For the first time from my memory, we really saw a more blended mix of content from both US and international players, including Australians. There was content from Binge and Stan that were being showcased, and were met to some really warm appraisal. So I think it's interesting because I think there was two things were happening. One is that COVID has again created a little bit of lag in terms of that creative development. So in terms of the cycle where they had that date of May as being where they do the upfronts in New York, they then do the screenings to showcase all that new content. They're out of cycle a little bit. I think that'll correct itself a little bit next year. But I think probably the change in how viewers are consuming and where they're consuming was probably where the biggest changes come. And again, I kind of point out the type of content they're showing was a little bit more broad to what we normally see, where I think 15 years ago it would be all the big broadcast shows that, likes of Fox, CBS, ABC were going to be launching in their fall slate. And I think now it's a bit more balanced. And look, it's fair to say that 50% of the audience now are from streamers. So you've got a different audience in mind who have different tastes. And so the content on offer was suitably different.
Last couple of questions. Your expectations for the rest of the year in terms of winning the year in total people, 25 to 54, grocery buyers, etc.
Yeah, look, I think we've got a really strong slate from now through the back end. A lot of proven shows. We've got a few new ones coming in there. So I think, we will, again, perform really strongly in terms of 25 to 4s and total people as well. The interesting thing, Aaron, is that, again, that metric doesn't reflect the total TV viewing audience. You get to the end of the year and OzTam will produce a set of numbers that are reflective of a portion, albeit a large portion, of how your content is consumed. So I guess the question for us is, again, to James's call around the overnights, how do we, as a industry, start reporting on numbers from both overnights and end of year that is more reflective of exactly what's happening with the audience and how they're consuming?
All right, so we're enjoying Celebrity Apprentice at the moment. That's heading into its final 2 weeks. What are the next couple of shows we'll roll into?
So we've got Ninja Warrior, obviously. We've got big 3 State of Origin telecast, which obviously one will have now passed by. Beauty and the Geek will be back. The block, which we've got a big change in terms of the tree change. So the first time we're moving out of the CBD or the burbs and into the countryside, and really kind of reflecting, what we've seen change with society over the last kind of couple of years. We obviously have parental guidance coming back, which, we're really pleased with that result last year. That's shooting at the moment. There's a couple of new formats that we're working on. I would think that one of those will be definitely on at the back end of this year. And then obviously also working on the likes of Snack Masters, as well as those 8:30 shows that you mentioned. We've got a new season of Paramedics, Emergency, The 100, UI, all those shows will be back again this year.
Awesome. Well, Hamish, good luck with the rest of the year, and well done on a successful start to the year with the Australian Open and maths and everything else that's coming up.
No, thanks, Aaron, and good to finally chat.